Richard Nixon, 37th President of the United States. The Republican from California held office from 1969 to 1974 in the midst of the Cold War. Some call him Slick Rick or Tricky Dicky for his unethical behaviors going all the way back to the Douglas Nixon senatorial race in 1949. His political career continued when he became VP under Eisenhower. He was also most known for his involvement as a Red Hunter during the Red Scare with his very anti-communist sentiments.
The Republican Party nominated Nixon for the 1968 presidential election because of his appeal to both conservatives and moderates. The Republican platform mainly focused on holding out for victory in Vietnam. Nixon was a minority president, polling less than half the popular vote, and Democrats held majorities in both houses of Congress.
Nixon was very insecure, which would ultimately bring him to partake in the Watergate scandal, costing him his second term. His administration was not laissez-faire as he took on many reforms, including welfare, civil rights, and the environment. The civil rights movement was improved, however, race remained an issue during the 1970s. Nixon's version of Lyndon B. Johnson's affirmative action protected groups instead of solely individuals against discrimination. There was a rise in employment and educational opportunities for minorities and women, which were helped by court cases such as the Griggs v. Duke Power Company in 1971. This court case allowed minorities and women to obtain jobs without having to take intelligence tests that could discriminate against them. Nixon's Philadelphia Plan in 1969 required construction trade unions to work toward hiring more black apprentices, focusing on groups rather than individuals, an alteration to Lyndon Johnson's concept of affirmative action. In 1973, the Roe v. Wade court case legalized abortion. However, the Milliken v. Bradley court case caused a racial schism between urban and suburban school districts, as officials could not force students across district lines, increasing white flight from cities to suburbs and slowed integration. Nixon and Warren Burger's court rulings were highly controversial, as people wished for reverse discrimination. The American Indian movement gained power during the 1970s as Indians asserted their status as separate semi-sovereign peoples. Indian activists seized Alcatraz Island, San Francisco Bay, and the village of Wounded Knee, which caught the nation's attention. The States v. Wheeler case in 1978 declared that Indian tribes were not subjected to individual states, but to Congress, giving them limited sovereignty. The gay movement also gained power. In New York, off-duty police officers at a gay bar assaulted gay people, which led to an uprising in support of equal rights. The Stonewall Rebellion led to a rise in activism within the gay community during the late 1960s and throughout the 70s. The second wave of feminism was inspired by the civil rights movement of the 1960s. The women's movement proved to be life-changing as women became more prominent in jobs like law and medicine. In 1972, Congress passed Title IX, which improved sex discrimination in schools. The Equal Rights Amendment by Alice Paul declared full constitutional equality for women. It was endorsed by Nixon and was the next step for gaining equality. However, anti-feminists led by conservative activist Phyllis Schlafly persuaded state legislators to vote against the amendment, and as a result, it failed to be part of the Constitution. This segment of Tricky Dicky will be back after the ad.
My name is Karan, founder and CEO of Ineffectual Solutions Incorporated. Do you suffer from a declining economy? Are tax cuts just not working for you? Do you struggle to find a way to increase the standard of living for modern Americans? Then you need to try Nixonomics. Nixonomics is a new, unproven solution to a weak economy thanks to its revolutionary new technology, Keynesianism. Keynesianism works by increasing deficit spending and spending our way back to a recovered economy. However, if you order now, I'll throw in Nixon Shocks free, so you get Nixonomics and Nixon Shocks all for the one low price of stagflation. But wait, there's more. If you call in the next 20 minutes, I'll throw in abandonment of the gold standard absolutely free. That's right, absolutely free. Just abandon the Bretton Woods Agreement. So that's Nixonomics, Nixon Shocks, and abandonment of the gold standard, all for the one low price of stagflation. So if you need a weak, ineffectual solution to your declining economy, then you need to try the Nixonomics package today. Just call 1-800-83-NIXON. That's 1-800-836-4966. Again, 1-800-836-4966.
Disclaimer. Any use of Nixonomics has a 100% chance of causing Watergate. Please ask your constituency if Nixonomics is right for you. Side effects may include unstable currency, high unemployment, and temporary improvements of the economy. If you experience any of these side effects, please stop taking Nixonomics and consult your party.
Now back to Tricky Dicky.
The Supreme Court under Chief Justice Earl Warren was extremely liberal and despised by the conservative Republicans taking office. Warren retired from his position as Chief Justice in 1969, and Nixon was responsible for filling his seat. Nixon nominated conservative Warren E. Burger, and he was quickly appointed. Nixon's goal was to reform the court to a strict interpretation of the Constitution and one that would steer clear of the controversial social problems that Warren's court was involved in. By 1971, Nixon had filled 4 vacancies on the Supreme Court with conservatives, but as he would soon find out, the justices ruled on their own ethics, not on the president's desires. While overall less liberal than the Warren Court, the Burger Court turned out one of the most controversial decisions of all time, and the Roe v. Wade case in 1973 that legalized abortion. One of Nixon's most monumental gains was his involvement in the environmentalist movement. In 1970, he created the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. This federal agency was responsible for regulating environmental hazards such as automobile emissions. The Clean Air Act of 1970 and Endangered Species Act of 1973 were also authorized during his presidency. Distrust in the government was increasing during the Nixon administration. Nixon had authorized several hundred secret bombing raids on Viet Cong positions in Cambodia, despite claiming to uphold and respect their neutrality. Nixon continued to bomb the northern Vietnamese forces in Cambodia after ceasefire, despite countless attempts by Congress to stop him. His continuous raids left Cambodia in pieces and under tyrannic rule. As a result of his blatant defiance and the expanding executive powers exhibited, Congress enacted the Wars Power Act in 1973 over Nixon's veto. This law limited executive power and the president's ability to wage war without the approval of Congress.
Nixon was heavily involved in the Vietnam War. His military strategy, Vietnamization, left South Vietnam to fend for themselves as it reduced the number of American combat troops in Vietnam against the North. However, they were supplied with American armored tanks and weapons. Furthermore, the Nixon Doctrine reinforced this idea where future countries would have to fight their own wars. However, the U.S. would still honor its existing defense commitments. Nixon's policies caused massive upheaval in America as anti-war protesters. This inspired him to appeal to the silent majority, those in the middle class who supported the war.
Let us be united for peace. Let us also be united against defeat. Because let us understand, North Vietnam cannot defeat or humiliate the United States. Only Americans can do that.
The Vietnam War was even more unpopular when American troops slaughtered innocent women and children in the My Lai village. Nixon began secret bombings in Cambodia to destroy Vietnamese communist bases there. As an effect, protests erupt on college campuses like Kent State and Jackson State. Nixon also had secret negotiations with North Vietnam with Kissinger's help. When they stopped, Nixon launched a 2-week bombing of North Vietnam to get their attention and discuss a treaty, and both sides agreed to stop fighting in the Paris Accords. The U.S. withdrew their remaining troops and reclaimed American prisoners of war. However, the ceasefire did not permanently end the fighting between the North and the South, where the North still kept some troops in the South. All these events led to a distrust in the government. For example, the Pentagon Papers were leaked to the press regarding the Vietnam War, and the War Powers Act reduced the powers of the president. There was a distrust and rivalry between China and the Soviet Union. Thus, Nixon and Kissinger took advantage of that. Nixon went to China and met up with Mao, putting pressure on the Soviet Union to be willing to negotiate with the U.S. The U.S. and Soviet Union underwent détente to reduce tensions. They agreed to limit the amount of anti-ballistic missiles and limit nuclear weapons. There were issues between the U.S. and the Middle East. During the Yom Kippur War, Syria and Egypt attacked Israel in 1973 to get the land they lost from the 6 Days War. This led the U.S. to support Israel with economic and military aid, and as a result, Israel successfully defended themselves. However, the oil-rich Arab nation in OPEC put an oil embargo on the U.S. The economy was negatively affected due to gas shortages and the current situation of inflation. When OPEC lifted the embargo, they quadrupled the cost, damaging the U.S. balance of international trade and adding more troubles to the already inflated nation.
Nixon's political career ended on a rough note with the infamous Watergate scandal. A few men working for the Republican Committee to Re-elect the President, or CREEP, were arrested for attempting to plant listening devices in the Democratic headquarters. The reputation of Nixon's administration worsened when his vice president, Spiro Agnew, was forced to resign for taking bribes. Nixon nominated Gerald Ford as his successor, and Congress approved.
Public unrest surrounding Watergate was growing, so an investigation was conducted. At first, Nixon denied having any involvement or previous knowledge, but recordings from the Oval Office provided incriminating evidence against him. One particular conversation, the smoking gun tape, proved Nixon's involvement with the cover-up, as he ordered the CIA to stop an inquiry from the FBI a few days after the break-in. Impeachment and even conviction loomed over Nixon's head, and he was advised to resign. Nixon's farewell address was broadcast on live television. Nixon left the White House on August 9, 1974, and was never to return.